fade in on snow-dusted fields under a blood moon, the Mississippi River murmuring like a judgment from God. It's Christmas Eve, 1861, in the shadowed halls of a grand plantation house. Eleanor Hartwell, mistress of all she surveys, unwraps her husband's gift, a trembling boy, enslaved, his skin like polished ebony, his gray eyes locking onto hers with a spark of unholy recognition. In that frozen moment, she feels the weight of divine retribution, this child, her own flesh, stolen by sin and returned by fate's cruel hand. What buried secret will unravel her soul tonight? The air hung thick with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, the kind that clings to velvet curtains and polished oak floors. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the parlor walls. Outside, the Mississippi wind howled softly, carrying echoes of distant slave hymns, mournful tunes that spoke of chains and promised lands, blending with the faint chime of church bells from Natchez Town. It was Christmas Eve, 1861, a night meant for joy and redemption, but in the Hartwell plantation house, 10 miles from the river's bend, joy was a fragile illusion, shattered by the unwrapping of a single, damning gift. Eleanor Hartwell stood at the center of it all, her hands trembling as she peeled back the coarse brown paper. She was 34 now, her once vibrant auburn hair pinned in a severe chignon, her gray eyes storm-cloud gray, her mother had called them, dulled by years of unspoken burdens. Her husband, William, watched with a smug grin, his whiskers flecked with tobacco crumbs, his broad frame stuffed into a woolen vest that strained against his prosperity. The household staff, enslaved souls in starched uniforms, hovered at the edges of the room, their faces masks of practiced neutrality, but their eyes darted with unspoken knowing. The boy emerged from the wrapping like an apparition from the grave, 14 years old, perhaps, tall for his age but whip-thin, his cotton shirt hanging loose on shoulders that had known the bite of labor. His skin gleamed under the candlelight, dark as the fertile soil that built this empire, and on his left wrist, half hidden by a frayed cuff, was a mark, a crescent scar, pale against the brown, like the moon's judgment etched in flesh. Eleanor's breath caught, a sharp intake that echoed in the silent room. The boy's eyes met hers, those same gray eyes, mirrors of her own, and in them, she saw not confusion, but a flicker of something ancient, biblical. Recognition. Like Cain, beholding Abel's ghost, risen to accuse. Her knees weakened, the room tilting as if the foundations of the house itself were crumbling under the weight of divine irony. William chuckled, oblivious, clapping the boy on the back. A fine addition to the stables, Eleanor. Strong lad, trained up proper in New Orleans. Merry Christmas, my dear. But Eleanor didn't hear him. The world narrowed to that wrist, that scar, a mark she had kissed once, in a fevered haze of agony and love, before the world tore it away. This was no stranger. This was her son. Her firstborn. The child of sin, hidden in the shadows of slavery, returned on this holiest of nights like a parable from Scripture, the prodigal not welcomed, but revealed as a curse. She collapsed into the nearest chair, its velvet upholstery cool against her fevered skin, as the staff exchanged glances, whispers of "Missus looks like she's seen a haint." The boy stood still, his bare feet shifting on the Persian rug, the chains of his status invisible but unbreakable. In his gaze, Eleanor felt the prick of judgment, not from him, but from above. How had God allowed this? Or was this his plan, a twisted nativity, where the gift was not salvation, but exposure? The parlor clock ticked onward, each second a hammer blow, as memories flooded her like the river in spring thaw. She had buried this secret for 15 years, locked it in the crypt of her soul, but secrets, like the dead, have a way of rising when the veil between worlds thins. On Christmas Eve, with the Christ child's birth celebrated in carols drifting from the slave quarters, her own child's rebirth threatened to unravel everything. To understand the depth of this haunting, we must journey back, through the mists of time and the thorns of regret, to the girl Eleanor once was. Born Eleanor Gaines in 1827, in the humid embrace of Charleston, South Carolina, she entered a world of lace parasols and iron shackles. The city was a jewel box of contradictions, cobblestone streets lined with pastel mansions, where horse-drawn carriages clattered past, markets alive with the cries of vendors and the shuffle of chained feet. Her father, Robert Gaines, was a merchant of middling means, his warehouse a labyrinth of bolts, silks from France shimmering like forbidden dreams, cottons from England crisp and unyielding. The air there smelled of salt from the harbor and the faint rot of damp wood, a scent that would forever remind Eleanor of hidden freedoms. Her mother, Constance, was a fortress of ambition, her corseted figure a symbol of Southern propriety. With 4 daughters, she mapped their futures like a general plotting battles, marriages as alliances, dowries as ammunition. The eldest, Amelia, was groomed for grandeur, the youngest, Lydia, spoiled with ribbons and sweets. Eleanor, the third, lingered in the shadows, a middle child, overlooked like a footnote in a grand narrative. This invisibility was her curse and her gift. While her sisters embroidered samplers of virtuous quotes, "A woman's place is in the home," Eleanor slipped into her father's study, the room dim with dust-moted sunlight filtering through heavy drapes. There, amid leather-bound tomes of Shakespeare and Locke, she discovered forbidden fruits, pamphlets smuggled from the north, words of Garrison and Douglas that burned like holy fire. "All men are created equal," they proclaimed, a heresy in this land of kings and chattel. She was 17 in the spring of 1844, her body blooming with the reckless vitality of youth, when the storm hit. Not just the literal gale that battered Charleston's harbor, splintering docks and flooding warehouses, but the storm that brought Thomas into her life. He arrived with tools in hand, a free black man rare as a comet in the southern sky, hired to mend the damage. 23, with sinewy arms forged in his family's carpentry shop, Thomas moved with the grace of a panther, his dark skin glistening under the sun as he planed wood and hammered nails. His parents had bought their freedom in Virginia's tobacco fields, migrating south to carve a niche in Charleston's underbelly, where free blacks navigated a tightrope of suspicion and skill. Eleanor watched from the office window, her heart quickening at the rhythm of his mallet, thud, thud, like a pulse awakening. The warehouse air was thick with sawdust, golden particles dancing in beams of light, settling on his shoulders like divine anointment. She told herself it was mere curiosity, the way one admires a craftsman's art. But curiosity curdled into longing. She began inventing errands, a pitcher of lemonade on sweltering afternoons, its condensation cool against her palms, questions about joinery that masked her desire to hear his voice, deep and resonant, like the low notes of a spiritual. Thomas was cautious, his eyes brown as aged bourbon, wary of the chasm between them. In the South, a glance could ignite a lynching, a word could summon the overseer's whip. But Eleanor's persistence wore him down, like waves eroding stone. They spoke in stolen moments, behind stacks of crates that smelled of exotic spices. He shared books he'd taught himself to read, pilfered novels, abolitionist tracts, and spoke of freedom not as a dream, but a hard-won reality, tasted in the sweat of honest labor. "It's like breathing free air after a lifetime underwater," he said once, his voice a murmur against the creak of settling beams. Their love ignited in June, a spark in dry tinder. Reckless meetings in the warehouse after dusk, the moon filtering through cracked windows, casting silver patterns on their entwined forms. The air hummed with crickets and the distant lap of harbor waves, her skin electric under his touch, calloused hands tracing her like sacred scripture. Eleanor knew the peril, tales whispered at tea parties of white women disgraced, families ruined, lives extinguished for lesser sins. But at 17, love felt like armor against the world's blades. She envisioned a future unbound, blind to the noose tightening. By August, the truth bloomed within her, a secret life, stirring like a storm cloud. Nausea in the mornings, her dresses pinching at the waist. She confessed to Thomas under a weeping willow in the garden, its tendrils swaying like morning veils. Fear flashed in his eyes, a shadow crossing the sun, but he held her close. "We'll run north," he whispered, his breath warm on her neck. "To Philadelphia, where the Quakers hide the hunted." But the South was a web, sticky with laws and bounty hunters. No haven for a white woman and her black lover, their mixed child a beacon for hatred. Fate intervened cruelly. Constance, ever vigilant, noted the pallor, the secrecy, the subtle swell. In Eleanor's bedroom one September evening, amid lavender-scented linens and flickering oil lamps, the confrontation erupted. "Who is he?" her mother hissed, eyes like flint. Exhausted, Eleanor crumbled, spilling the tale in sobs. The response was a whirlwind of fury and calculation. Robert stormed the warehouse the next dawn, accusing Thomas of theft before witnesses. Bolts of silk vanished, a fabricated crime. Thomas was dragged away in irons, the clank echoing like judgment bells. Held 3 days in a fetid jail, he emerged broken but alive, warned, "Leave or die." He vanished that night, a ghost into the shadows. Eleanor, confined to her room, pounded the walls until her fists bled, but no word came. Did he flee north? Was he caught, sold south? The silence was a wound that never scarred. In October, they exiled her to Georgia, to Cousin Abigail's remote estate, a squat house amid cotton fields, the air heavy with red clay dust and the crack of whips. Abigail, a widow with a face like weathered granite, accepted the fee with a sneer, viewing Eleanor's plight as moral rot. "Sin begets suffering," she quoted from Proverbs, her voice cold as the iron stove. Eleanor was imprisoned indoors, her world shrinking to four walls papered in faded florals, the only sounds the distant moans of laboring slaves and the tick of a grandfather clock measuring her isolation. Dinah, the enslaved midwife, became her reluctant companion, 40ish, with hands like roots, gnarled from birthing generations. She brewed teas of ginger and peppermint, her dark eyes holding secrets of her own bondage. As Eleanor's belly swelled, so did her dread. Nights brought fever dreams, Thomas's face dissolving into mist, the child within her crying out like a prophet in the wilderness. She read her smuggled Bible, fingers tracing verses of redemption, Psalm 51, David's plea for mercy after sin, "Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity." Was this her penance? A child conceived in love, doomed by hate? Labor struck on a March night in 1845, the wind rattling shutters like angry spirits. Alone with Dinah in a dim room lit by a single lantern, Eleanor writhed on sweat-soaked sheets, her screams tearing the air like fabric ripped asunder. 14 hours of agony, waves of pain crashing like the Atlantic on Charleston's shores, her body a battlefield. When the boy emerged, slick and wailing, Dinah lifted him, small, 6 pounds, dark-skinned with a tuft of black hair, his cries a piercing accusation. His eyes opened, gray, stormy, hers. Eleanor clutched him, inhaling his milky scent, tracing the crescent birthmark on his wrist, a family curse or blessing, passed like original sin from mother to daughter to this forbidden son. For a fleeting eternity, 1 minute, perhaps, she held him close, whispering vows into his tiny ear, "I'll find you. We'll be free." Her tears salted his skin. Then Dinah pried him away, her face impassive but her eyes flickering with shared sorrow. "Best not to bond, miss," she murmured, vanishing into the hall. Abigail entered later, her boots thudding on the floorboards. "The child's dead," she announced flatly, as if noting a failed crop. "Weak from the circumstances. Buried already. God's mercy, sparing you shame." Eleanor's world shattered, a void opening where hope had been. She screamed denials, but weakness pinned her. Was it true? Or had they sold him, like so many others, into the maw of slavery? Powerless, 17, she lay broken, staring at cracks in the ceiling that mapped her fractured soul. In those days of fevered grief, she felt God's gaze, stern, unyielding. Had he forsaken her, or was this the forge of redemption? She emerged transformed, the fire of loss hardening her like steel. The girl of poetry and passion died, in her place, a woman armored in silence. Returning to Charleston in April, she wore the mask of recovery, a minor ailment, her parents lied. Society nodded, oblivious. But nights brought phantoms, the boy's cry echoing, Thomas's touch a ghost on her skin. She buried the pain deep, like seeds in fallow ground, waiting for some unholy harvest. In 1847, William Hartwell entered her life, a widower of 42, his first wife claimed by childbirth's grim reaper. Severe-faced, with a jaw like a plowshare, he owned vast lands in Mississippi. No romance sparked, this was transaction. Her parents orchestrated the match, whispering of security. Eleanor accepted, her yes a surrender. Love was folly, stability, salvation. They wed in February 1848, her white gown a shroud, the church air thick with incense that failed to mask her despair. Hartwell Plantation loomed like a whitewashed tomb, columns rising from moss-draped oaks, verandas overlooking fields where bent backs toiled under relentless sun. The Mississippi River curved nearby, its muddy waters a symbol of inexorable flow, time, sin, retribution. 2,000 acres, over 100 slaves, an empire built on blood and cotton. Eleanor's domain was the house overseeing cooks and kitchens redolent of cornbread and ham, managing linen starched stiff as propriety. She learned to command with a cool voice, ignoring the whip's cracks from the fields, the auction block's echoes in town. Children came, but joy did not. Catherine in 1850, healthy, with William's hair and Eleanor's eyes. William grunted disappointment, no son. Eleanor nursed her dutifully, but her arms felt empty, haunted by that Georgia ghost. Margaret followed in 1853, another girl, William's barbed sharpening, useless airs. Eleanor absorbed them like rain on stone, her silence a shield. In church, amid hymns of grace, she prayed for forgiveness, feeling the weight of Psalm 32, "When I kept silence, my bones waxed old." Was her barrenness of sons divine punishment? The years blurred into routine and social teas with parasols shading powdered faces, evenings by firelight with William droning of yields and politics. But solitude brought visions, the crescent mark glowing like a brand, the boy's gray eyes accusing from shadows. She wondered of Thomas alive? Enslaved? Dead? The unknown gnawed like termites in the soul. By 1860, the nation cracked like dry earth. Lincoln's election ignited secession fever. Mississippi broke free in January 1861, William toasting with brandy, his voice booming of God-ordained slavery. Eleanor listened in silence, dread coiling like a serpent. Whispers among the slaves grew, Union armies marching, freedom's trumpet sounding. William clamped down, more patrols, harsher lashes. The air hummed with tension, spiritual unrest, as if the land itself awaited judgment. In November, William journeyed to New Orleans, his carriage rumbling away under gray skies. 2 weeks later, December 23, he returned triumphant, packages piled high. Gifts for the season, he beamed, unaware of the thunderhead brewing. That night, as stars pierced the velvet sky, Eleanor retired early, a premonition chilling her bones, like Eve sensing the serpent's approach. Christmas Eve dawned crisp, the house alive with preparations, evergreens draped in ribbons, the scent of roasting turkey mingling with beeswax. Slaves hummed carols softly, their voices a undercurrent of hope amid despair. William presented his surprise in the parlor, the boy stepping forward like a figure from Revelation. And in that instant, time folded, past sins colliding with present grace or wrath. Eleanor's mind reeled, fragments flashing, Dinah's hands, Abigail's lie, the burial that never was. Had they sold him? Trafficked through markets, branded, broken? Now here, enslaved in her own home, a cruel circle, divine poetry. Empathy surged for the boy, her son, his confusion a mirror of her own lost innocence. Dread followed, William's discovery would mean ruin, perhaps death. Curiosity burned, how had he survived? What tales did he carry? But deeper, a spiritual chill, this was no accident. On Christ's birth night, her hidden sin unveiled, like the Magi bearing not gold, but truth. Redemption? Or retribution? The boy's eyes held the answer, gray storms brewing. The house seemed to hold its breath, the wind outside whispering prophecies. What would come next? Unraveling threads of blood, bondage, and the inexorable hand of God. The parlor's air was heavy, saturated with the mingled scents of fresh-cut holly and melting tallow, the candles sputtering in their brass holders like faltering prayers. Garlands of evergreen draped the mantel, their needles whispering against the stone as a draft slipped through the cracked window panes, carrying the distant, mournful lowing of cattle from the barns. Outside, the Mississippi night pressed close, stars pricked like thorns in a velvet crown, while frost etched crystalline patterns on the glass, nature's own stained windows, depicting scenes of judgment and redemption. It was Christmas Eve, 1861, a night when the world celebrated the birth of a child in a manger, humble and holy, but in the Hartwell plantation house, birth and bondage intertwined in a profane parody of the Nativity. William Hartwell lounged in his high-backed chair, the leather creaking under his weight, a tumbler of bourbon glinting amber in his hand. His face, ruddy from the fire's glow and the flush of triumph, split into a grin as he surveyed the room. The cotton sales in New Orleans had been at coup prices inflated by the war's hunger for Southern gold, contracts sealed with handshakes and promises of loyalty to the Confederacy. Gifts overflowed from his trunks, silk shawls for the daughters, Catherine and Margaret, who fidgeted in their starched dresses, their curls bouncing like innocent cherubs, a new rifle for himself, oiled and gleaming, and for Eleanor, something special. A practical luxury, he had called it earlier, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. The household staff, enslaved men and women in crisp linens, their faces etched with the weary vigilance of those who served without choice, stood in a silent semicircle, shadows pooling at their feet like spilled ink. He presented it with flourish, the bill of sale wrapped in crimson paper tied with gold ribbon, as if it were a bauble from a Parisian shop rather than a deed to a human soul. For you, my dear, William," said, his breath carrying the sharp tang of spirits. "Another hand for the house. Trained in the kitchens, quick on his feet. Name's Samuel. Comes from good stock out of New Orleans, highly recommended by the trader." His words hung in the air, casual as discussing a new horse or a bolt of cloth, oblivious to the spiritual undercurrents swirling like the river's eddies outside. Eleanor's fingers, pale and slender, numb as if dipped in ice water, accepted the package. The paper crinkled under her touch, a sound like dry leaves crumbling, echoes of autumn's past, of lives discarded. She unwrapped it deliberately, each fold revealing more of the document beneath, ink scrawled in precise script, seals stamped like brands on flesh. Samuel, age approximately 14. Skills, domestic service, culinary assistance. Distinguishing features, crescent-shaped scar, left wrist. The words leaped at her like serpents from the page, coiling around her throat. Her vision tunneled, the room's edges blurring into a haze of gold and shadow, the fire's crackle fading to a distant roar. She lifted her gaze, slowly, as if emerging from underwater, and truly beheld the boy for the first time. He stood in the corner, a slender silhouette against the wainscoting, tall but gaunt, his frame honed by labor's unforgiving blade. Dark skin absorbed the light, making him seem almost ethereal, a figure from some ancient frieze. His hair, cropped close, framed sharp features, a high forehead, a nose with a subtle bridge that mirrored her own. Clean but threadbare clothes hung on him, a cotton shirt faded from countless washings, trousers patched at the knees. His hands clasped before him, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the floor in that ingrained posture of invisibility, learned through years of survival in a world that demanded erasure. But as her stare burned into him, he raised his head. Gray eyes, storm-laden, piercing, met hers. The same shade as her own, inherited from generations of Gaines women. Now staring back like a reflection in a shattered mirror. The room spun, a vertigo of revelation. Eleanor gripped the mahogany table's edge, its polished surface cool and unyielding under her palms, anchoring her as the floor seemed to heave like a ship in tempest. In his face, she traced the ghosts, her own youthful contours in the curve of his cheek, Thomas's resolute jaw in the set of his chin, the quiet dignity in his stance that spoke of his father's unyielding spirit. And then, as he shifted uneasily, his sleeve inched up, exposing the wrist. There it was, the crescent scar, pale and curved like a sickle moon, a mark of lineage, of curse, of unbreakable bond. "Eleanor?" William's voice cut through the fog, distant as thunder over the hills. "You look pale as a ghost. Everything all right?" Concern laced his tone, but it was superficial, the worry of a man more attuned to ledgers than souls. She couldn't form words. Breath lodged in her chest like a stone. The boy's gaze held hers, confusion swirling in those gray depths, mingled with an instinctive spark, recognition, primal and unspoken, like Adam naming the beasts but sensing his own rib returned. "Ma'am?" His voice was soft, tentative, threaded with the accent of southern fields, yet carrying an undercurrent of care forged in hardship. "Are you unwell?" The bill of sale slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the rug like a fallen leaf from Eden's tree. Eleanor turned, her movements mechanical, a puppet pulled by invisible strings of fate. She fled the parlor, the staff's murmurs rising behind her like a chorus of witnesses, Mrs. Acton strange, one whispered, the words laced with the knowing hush of those who saw more than they spoke. William's baffled call followed, "Eleanor?" What in God's name? But she didn't stop. Up the grand staircase she climbed, each step a thud echoing her pounding heart, the banisters carved wood slick under her sweating palm. Into her bedroom she retreated, the door clicking shut like a sepulchre's seal. The room enveloped her, walls papered in faded damask, the four-poster bed with its canopy like a shroud, a vanity mirror reflecting her ashen face back at her, distorted in the dim lamplight. She stood in the center, heart hammering against her ribs like a prisoner demanding release, breaths coming in ragged gasps that fogged the chill air. The boy was alive. Her son, her firstborn, wrenched from her arms in that Georgia hell 16 years ago, was alive. Not dust in an unmarked grave, but flesh and blood, standing in her home, enslaved by her husband's whim. Owned. A commodity unwrapped on Christmas, like the Christ child presented to the Magi, but twisted into blasphemy, a mother gifted her own child as property. She sank to the floor, knees buckling on the Aubusson rug, its intricate patterns blurring through tears. Hands pressed to her mouth, stifling the primal wail rising from her depths, a sob laced with scream, a lament echoing the cries of Hagar in the wilderness, cast out with her son Ishmael. For 16 years, she had carried the void, a hollow in her soul where he should have been. She had mourned in silence, shaped her life around the lie of his death, buried the guilt like a seed in barren soil. Love turned to ash, passion to penance. And now, the resurrection, not joyous like Lazarus from the tomb, but harrowing, revealing the rot beneath. They had sold him. Her family parents, cousin Abigail, the midwife Dinah, had conspired in shadows, trading her infant for silence, for reputation's sake. To erase the stain of her sin, that forbidden union with Thomas, they had condemned a child to chains. The why clawed at her, divine retribution? For her youthful transgression, defying the laws of man and God? Or human cruelty, cloaked in piety? Psalm 51 haunted her, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Was this her inheritance, passed to him like the crescent mark? And Samuel, did he sense the blood tie, that spiritual thread binding them across years of separation? Or was he adrift, a lamb among wolves, unknowing of his true shepherd? Sleep eluded her that night, the bed's linens twisted like thorns. She lay rigid, eyes fixed on the ceiling's plaster medallions, mind a whirlwind of fragments, his gray eyes pleading, the scar's pale glow, Thomas's face fading into memory. Below, in the slave quarters, her son slept or perhaps lay awake, pondering the strange white woman whose gaze had pierced him. 20 feet separated them, yet an abyss yawned, law, society, the iron bars of slavery. He was her flesh, yet her property. Mother and mistress, redeemer and oppressor. The Bible's tales mocked her, Rachel weeping for her children, refused to be comforted because they were not. But hers was returned, only to torment. Before dawn's first blush, Eleanor rose, dressing in haste, her fingers fumbling buttons, the fabric of her gown whispering judgments. The house slumbered, corridors dim and echoing, the grandfather clocks tick a relentless countdown. She navigated by memory, past the parlor's ghosts, out the back door into the yard. Frost crunched under her boots, the air biting like accusation, stars fading as if retreating from request. The slave quarters loomed a row of weathered cabins, roofs sagging like burdened shoulders, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. She had inspected them before, a dutiful mistress ensuring efficiency, but never like this, clandestine, driven by maternal fire. Pushing open a door, she entered the dim interior, cramped as a confessional, air thick with the scents of sweat, wood smoke, and straw. Narrow cots lined the walls, bodies huddled under thin blankets, breaths sinking in sleep's fragile peace. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, the hearth's embers casting ruddy flickers. There he was, Samuel, perched on a cot's edge, awake, staring at his hands as if divining secrets in his palms. Samuel, she whispered, the name a prayer on her lips. He startled, head snapping up, then composed himself into deference, standing, shoulders squared, eyes lowered. Ma'am, he murmured, voice steady but laced with wariness. Is something wrong? She stepped inside, door creaking shut, the sleepers stirring faintly but not rousing. Closer now, the dim light etched his features, the vulnerability in his brow, the resilience in his stance. I need to ask you something, she said, urgency sharpening her tone. Where were you born? Who raised you? What do you remember? Confusion furrowed his brow. He glanced at the others, then back. Born in Georgia, ma'am, near Savannah on a plantation. Told my mama was a slave, died giving me life. Her breath hitched, a vice around her heart. Who told you that? The woman what raised me. Dinah. Kitchen worker. Cared for me till I was 12. His voice trailed, gaze dropping to the dirt floor, scarred by countless feet. And then, she pressed, stepping nearer, the air between them charged like before a storm. Then she passed, ma'am. Sold after that. Twice over. Last in New Orleans, to your husband. Dinah. The midwife's name struck like lightning, the same hands that had caught him at birth, that had spirited him away. Not murder, but mercy? Or theft? Dinah had kept him, raised him as her own, shielding him until death's claim. Then the market's maw swallowed him, spat him here. Do you remember anything about your mother? Eleanor's whisper trembled. What did Dinah say? He hesitated, guard up like a shield. Said she was young. Kind. Didn't want to give me up, but no choice. A pause, heavy as stone. Said she had gray eyes, like mine. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes, hot and unbidden. She reached out, trembling, grasping his left wrist, gently pushing back the sleeve to reveal the crescent, luminous in the ember light. Then her own sleeve withdrawn, mirroring mark exposed. Twin sigils, like God's own seal on their shared fate. Samuel stared, eyes widening in the dawn of truth. Confusion morphed to awe, then shadowed doubt. He met her gaze, the gray mirroring gray, souls aligning like planets in eclipse. I'm your mother, she breathed, voice cracking like parchment. I bore you 16 years ago in Georgia. They told me you died. I grieved you, buried you in my heart. But you lived. All this time, you lived. He recoiled, wrist slipping free, shaking his head as if to dispel an apparition. No, ma'am. Can't be. It is, she insisted, desperation rising. The marks. The eyes. You're my son. His expression hardened, a wall erecting. If that's true, why am I still a slave? Why'd you let him buy me? Why sneak here in the dark, stead of setting me free? The questions pierced like arrows, truth's barbs embedding deep. Excuses flooded her mind, the law's chains, William's dominion, society's scorn, but they rang hollow, echoes in an empty tomb. She was complicit, her silence a sin of omission. I didn't know, she faltered, voice breaking. Not until last night. I thought you gone forever. But you know now, he countered, eyes flashing with righteous fire, like a young prophet confronting kings. And I'm still here. Still owned. The blow landed, guilt's hammer on her anvil soul. She wanted to promise the world freedom, reunion, atonement, but words faltered. I'll find a way, she vowed, clutching at hope. To free you. I swear it. He regarded her, pity softening the storm in his eyes, a child forgiving the parent, roles inverted in divine irony. Don't promise what you can't deliver, ma'am. Then he turned, reclining on the cot, back to her like a closed door. Eleanor lingered, heart fracturing anew, then retreated. Dawn broke as she crossed the yard, pink fingers streaking the sky, a new day's judgment. Birds trilled, indifferent to human woes, as the plantation stirred. In the ensuing days, obsession gripped her like a fever. The truth demanded excavation, roots unearthed from soil of deceit. She penned letters in secret, quill scratching parchment by candlelight, to Abigail in Georgia, inquiries veiled as nostalgia, to those who might recall Dinah, probing for fragments, to New Orleans traders, seeking chains of sail. Responses trickled, silence from most, evasion from others. Abigail's reply arrived, a single sheet, ink cold as her heart. The matter was resolved fittingly then. Dwell not on bygones, it profits none. Eleanor crumpled it, rage surging like bile. Resolved fittingly, as if her son were a ledger error, corrected with a stroke. But the past clawed back, insistent. War drums beat louder, Union whispers among the slaves growing to murmurs. William prattled of Confederate victories, blind to the spiritual quake beneath. Eleanor watched Samuel from afar, serving meals with quiet grace, his eyes avoiding hers, a chasm of unspoken truths between them. Empathy bloomed, for his stolen childhood, the whipped shadows, the auction block's humiliation. Dread coiled, discovery meant peril, for him, scandal, for her, ruin. Curiosity gnawed, what tales did he hold? Dreams of freedom? Memories of Dinah's lullabies? Yet spiritually, a chill pervaded, like Job questioning God amid ashes. Was this redemption's path, forcing confrontation with sin? Or eternal haunting, a legacy of divine justice deferred? The crescent marks burned in her mind, symbols of inheritance, guilt passed like manna, bitter on the tongue. Nights brought visions, Thomas's ghost, accusing, the boy's birth cry echoing eternal. She prayed in the chapel, knees on cold stone, begging mercy. Forgive us our debts, she whispered, but debts demanded payment. As weeks blurred, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She hoarded coins, mapped escape routes north toward Union lines, where freedom's flame flickered. But risks loomed: patrols, hounds, the river's treacherous currents. And William's suspicions stirred, his brows furrowing at her distraction. "You're distant, wife," he grumbled over dinner, fork clinking china like warning bells. In quiet moments, she stole glances at Samuel, seeing not slave, but son, a vessel of potential, divine spark undimmed. Reflection deepened, her life's edifice, built on lies, crumbled. Justice beckoned, retribution's sword poised. The plantation, once sanctuary, now prison of the soul. What price for atonement? Blood? Freedom? Or the ultimate sacrifice, echoing Calvary's hill? The letters burned in Eleanor's desk like coals in a dying fire, sheets of heavy cream paper, ink smeared where tears had fallen. She had written to Abigail 3 times since Christmas, each missive sharper than the last. The first polite, seeking clarification about that long-ago night in Georgia. The second pleading, begging for names, for dates, for any scrap of truth about who had carried her newborn son to the auction block. The third furious, accusing, words she had never dared speak aloud now scrawled in frantic strokes: "How could you sell my child? How could you look me in the eye and pronounce him dead?" Abigail's single reply had been ice: "Do not reopen wounds best left closed." After that, silence. The cousin who had once shared blood and secrets now treated Eleanor as if she were contagious, a threat to respectable memory. So Eleanor turned to the only living witness left, Samuel. She sought him in stolen moments, when the kitchen steamed with boiling laundry and the other servants were occupied, when the gardens lay empty under winter's pale sun, when the house slept and only the crickets bore witness. She asked questions disguised as idle curiosity. Where had he learned to peel potatoes so deftly? Had Dinah taught him that trick with the knife? What stories had the old woman told him around the hearth on cold Georgia nights? Piece by piece, a mosaic formed, each shard cutting deeper. One gray February afternoon, she found him alone in the pantry, counting jars of preserved peaches by lamplight. The air smelled of cloves and dust, the shelves towering like silent sentinels. Samuel's long fingers moved with precision, marking tallies on a scrap of paper, letters and numbers Dinah had risked lashes to teach him. "She said my mother loved me fiercely," he offered without looking up, his voice soft as falling ash. "Said she held me close, kissed this mark on my wrist, and wept when they pried me from her arms. Said my mother begged them not to take me, but a young white girl had no power against family and law." Eleanor's throat closed. Tears slipped hot down her cheeks, dripping onto the folded linens in her arms. "It's true," she whispered, barely audible over the distant clank of pots. "Every word. I held you for 1 minute, one eternal minute, and kissed that crescent scar. I screamed until my voice gave out when Dinah carried you away." Samuel's hand stilled on a jar. He turned then, her eyes meeting hers with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. "Then why did you let them?" The question hung between them like a blade. "I was 17, Eleanor said, the words tasting of ash and regret. "No money, no allies, no rights. They told me you died in the night, weak lungs, they said. A mercy. I believed them because believing was easier than fighting a world that had already crushed me." Her voice cracked. "I had no reason to doubt until you stood in my parlor on Christmas Eve." Samuel set the jar down with deliberate care. "And now," he asked, the words quiet but edged like flint. "Now that you know I'm alive, now that you have a roof, a husband, daughters, do you have power now? Do you have a choice?" Eleanor opened her mouth, but no promise came. She wanted to swear oaths: "I'll free you, we'll flee north, I'll burn this plantation to the ground if I must," but truth strangled them. William held the purse strings, the deeds, the law itself. A wife's property was her husband's, even her body belonged to him under coverture. To buy Samuel's freedom would require William's signature, his money, his consent. And consent would demand explanation. One hint of the boy's parentage, and William's rage would be biblical, flood and fire combined. He might sell Samuel south to spite her. He might beat the truth from her. He might lock her away as mad. "I'm trying," she said at last, the words feeble as winter reeds. I'm searching for a way. Samuel nodded once, slowly, but the disappointment in his eyes was a living thing. Gray storms gathering force. He turned back to his counting, dismissing her without a word. Eleanor fled the pantry, the scent of peaches clinging to her like mockery, sweetness preserved while lives rotted. The weeks that followed were a slow crucifixion. She could scarcely endure William's presence. At dinner, his voice droning about cotton prices and Confederate victories grated like chains dragged across stone. Each time he praised Samuel's efficiency, fine purchase, that boy, worth every dollar. Eleanor's stomach twisted. William noticed her pallor, her silences, but blamed wore nerves and prescribed more church attendance. He had no idea he dined each night with the woman whose son he owned, whose secret threatened to topple his world. Samuel moved through the house like smoke, present yet intangible. Polishing silver until it gleamed like Judgment Day trumpets. Carrying trays with steady hands that bore the same crescent mark as hers. His footsteps in the corridors haunted her dreams. She watched him constantly, greedily, the way his brow furrowed when concentrating, the graceful economy of his movements inherited from Thomas, the quiet intelligence in his eyes that no whip had extinguished. She was trying to drink in 16 lost years, but every glance widened the chasm. He rarely met her gaze now. When he did, it was with careful neutrality, the look one gives a mistress, not a mother. Catherine and Margaret, her daughters by William, remained blissfully unaware. 10 and 8, all ringlets and pinafores, they ordered Samuel about with the casual cruelty of children raised in dominion. Boy, my shoes need cleaning. Samuel, fetch my doll from the veranda now. Watching her white daughters command their half-brother, blood of her blood serving blood of her blood, Eleanor felt shame corrode her from within, a spiritual acid eating at bone. In February, Providence or temptation offered a window. William announced a week-long journey to Jackson for Confederate strategy meetings. The morning his carriage wheels crunched down the Oakline Drive, Eleanor felt the house exhale. She found Samuel in the parlor, rubbing beeswax into the dining table until mahogany gleamed like dark water. "Come with me," she said, voice low but urgent. He paused, cloth in hand, surprise flickering across his guarded features. "Ma'am?" "Now." "To the library." He followed without question, footsteps soft behind her like a shadow. The library smelled of leather, tobacco, and William's bay rum, masculine scents that usually repelled her, but today felt like sanctuary. She closed the heavy oak door, turned the key. For the first time, they were truly alone. "I need you to know everything," she said, hands clasped to still their trembling. "All of it." And she told him. She painted Thomas in vivid strokes, the free black carpenter with hands that shaped beauty from raw pine, who read Plato by candlelight and dreamed of a world where skin did not dictate destiny. She described their stolen meetings in Charleston's warehouse, the way sawdust caught in his hair like golden stars. The reckless love that bloomed in summer heat. The terror of discovery. The fabricated theft that drove Thomas from the city forever. She recounted the exile to Georgia, the endless months of confinement, the night of labor when Dinah's strong hands brought him into the world screaming. That single minute holding him, his tiny fist around her finger, his gray eyes blinking up at her as if recognizing her soul. The lie of his death. The years of buried grief that had hollowed her out until William's proposal offered structure for survival. Samuel listened motionless, face carved from ebony, betraying nothing. When she finished, silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. "Finally, what do you want from me?" The question struck like a lash. Eleanor faltered. What did she want? Absolution? A son's embrace? To erase 16 years with confession? "Do you want forgiveness?" he continued, voice flat as winter fields. "Want me to call you mother? To thank you for finally speaking truth?" "I want..." Her voice broke. "I want you to know you were loved from the moment you drew breath. That your existence was not shame but miracle. That I never stopped mourning you." Samuel's laugh was hollow, bitter as gall. "You're my owner, ma'am. That's our only true relation. Law says it. God, they claim, ordains it. Even if you freed me tomorrow, supposing you could, what then? I'd be a freed Negro in Mississippi during war. Hunted. Starved. Lynched for looking wrong at a white man. And you'd still be the woman who owned me while knowing I was flesh of your flesh. That's not fair. His voice rose, cracking with the first raw emotion she had heard from him. You speak of fair? I was sold as an infant. Raised by a woman who loved me but couldn't protect me. Beaten for learning letters. Starved when crops failed. Passed hand to hand like livestock. And now my mother, the woman who bore me, lives in luxury 20 feet away, watching me serve her table, and does nothing. Eleanor sobbed openly, shoulders shaking. I didn't know you lived. If I'd known, I'd have torn the world apart searching. Maybe, he said, softening for a heartbeat. But you know now. And still, nothing. He left her there amid William's maps and ledgers, door closing with quiet finality. The fog that followed lasted days. Eleanor moved through chores like a sleepwalker, overseeing laundry, correcting the girls' French conjugations, smiling thinly at neighbors' visits. But Samuel's accusation echoed ceaselessly, "You're still not doing anything." She weighed impossible options. Convince William to manumit Samuel? He would demand reasons, truth would destroy them all. Buy his freedom secretly? She owned nothing, not even the dress on her back. Help him escape? The river teemed with patrols, dogs and bounty hunters waited. Failure meant flogging, sail south, perhaps death, for both. Yet inaction condemned her son to perpetual servitude under her own roof. Each day she failed him echoed the first betrayal. In late March, with William returned and routine reimposed, Eleanor chose what little she could offer, truth about his father. She waited until dusk, when the house settled and field hands' spirituals drifted faintly from the quarters. Samuel's cabin glowed with a single candle. He sat on his cot, tracing words in Dinah's worn Bible pages soft as cloth from years of secret reading. Samuel. He looked up warily but did not rise. I want to tell you about your father. He closed the book, set it aside. All right. She perched on the cot's edge, careful not to crowd him. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and lye soap, walls thin against March wind. His name was Thomas, she began, voice steadying as memory flowed. A free man of color, born to parents who bought their liberty in Virginia. Tall, strong, with hands that could coax beauty from wood. He built things that lasted, furniture, homes, dreams. Taught himself to read by lamplight, devouring books others burned. He believed freedom was God's intention for all his children, not just white ones. She described Thomas's smile rare, but lighting his face like sunrise. The way he spoke of justice, voice deep and musical. Their plans to flee north, whispered in warehouse shadows. The day armed men dragged him away on false charges. The silence that followed, no letters, no trace, perhaps dead, perhaps enslaved despite papers. I loved him, she said simply. More than breath. More than propriety or safety. You come from that love, Samuel. From courage and hope, not just accident. He listened without interruption, candlelight flickering across features that carried Thomas's determination in the set of jaw, her own thoughtfulness in the eyes. When she finished, silence stretched, broken only by wind rattling the tin roof. Thank you, he said at last, voice rough. Eleanor rose, tears falling freely. At the door, his voice stopped her. Eleanor. Her Christian name from his lips, first time, pierced like grace. She turned. I don't forgive you, he said quietly. Can't. Maybe never will. But I believe you didn't know I lived. And I believe you loved him. That's something. Not redemption. Not reconciliation. But a crack in the wall between them, a sliver where light might someday enter. Outside, March wind carried distant thunder, artillery from Tennessee, or God's own drumbeat. Union forces pressed south, victory by victory. On neighboring plantations, enslaved people vanished into night, following the North Star toward uncertain freedom. William raged, hiring more overseers, threatening dire punishments. In April 1862, everything would change. But in that moment, walking back across frost-kissed grass to the great house, Eleanor felt the first faint stirrings of resolve. The war was coming. Judgment was coming. And when it arrived, she would no longer stand silent. For her son's sake, and perhaps for her soul's, she would finally choose. The spring of 1862 arrived like Judgment Day itself, humid air thick with the metallic tang of gunpowder drifting south from Shiloh, where rivers ran red and the Confederacy's illusions bled out. On Hartwell Plantation, the once manicured lawns grew wild with weeds, the cotton fields lay half-tended, fear a constant companion in every breath. William paced the verandas like a caged bear, maps spread across the dining table, muttering about Yankee devils and inevitable victory. Overseers cracked whips more frequently, eyes scanning the tree line for signs of restlessness among the enslaved. Whispers spread through the quarters like wildfire, Union soldiers freeing people as they came, burning barns, hanging traitors. Freedom was no longer a distant hymn, it was a boots-on-ground reality marching closer. Eleanor watched it all with a heart-divided terror for what collapse might bring, and a treacherous spark of hope. For the first time in her life, the iron laws that had chained her son seemed fragile, cracking under the weight of war. Samuel's presence haunted every room, his quiet footsteps carrying trays, his gray eyes avoiding hers yet burning with unspoken accusation. Since that night in the cabin, when he had accepted the truth of his father but withheld forgiveness, a fragile bridge had formed, thin as spider silk, but real. She caught him sometimes tracing the crescent scar on his wrist, staring into middle distance as if communing with ghosts. Dinah's Bible lay hidden beneath his cot, pages worn from secret readings of Exodus, "Let my people go." One April evening, as twilight bled purple across the sky and cicadas began their shrill chorus, Eleanor found him alone in the kitchen. The great hearth fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows on copper pots that swung gently from hooks. Steam rose from a cauldron of stew, carrying scents of ham, hock and thyme, comforting aromas that mocked the tension in the air. Samuel chopped onions with rhythmic precision, tears in his eyes from the sting, or perhaps something deeper. She closed the door softly behind her, the latch clicking like a heartbeat. "The Union troops are close," she whispered, voice barely louder than the fire's pop. "Raiders have been seen 5 miles north. If you wanted to leave, now would be the time." Samuel's knife paused mid-slice. He turned slowly, gray eyes searching her face in the firelight, looking for deception, for traps, for the sincerity he had long ceased expecting. "You're telling me to run?" His tone was flat, careful. "I'm telling you the world is breaking open." Eleanor's hands trembled at her sides, hidden in the folds of her skirt. "I can't free you with papers, William would never allow it, and the law stands with him. But I can look away. I can delay notice of your absence. I can lie for you, buy you hours, perhaps days." He studied her longer, the knife forgotten. Onion's sharp scent filled the space between them. "Why now?" he asked finally. "Why suddenly willing to risk everything?" The question pierced clean through her defenses. Eleanor felt tears rise, hot and unbidden. "Because I've been a coward," she confessed, voice cracking like thin ice. "Fear has ruled me longer than William ever could. I buried my love for you under layers of silence, propriety, survival. Doing nothing made me complicit, worse than those who sold you, because I knew and still chose chains. I can't erase the past, Samuel. But I can give you a future. Let me do this one righteous thing before God calls me to account." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, the barest nod. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll go. But not tonight. Not blindly. I'll know when the moment comes." "When?" Urgency clawed at her. "I'll know." His voice held the quiet authority of a man who had survived by instinct alone. "Trust me." She wanted to argue, to bundle him into darkness that very hour, but wisdom prevailed. Timing was life or death. She nodded, pressing a small bundle into his hand as she left, cornbread wrapped in cloth, a few silver coins pilfered from the household jar, a folded map sketched from memory showing back trails to the river. "Godspeed," she whispered, the door closing behind her like a final amen. 2 weeks crawled by in agonizing suspense. Each dawn, Eleanor scanned the quarters, relief flooding her at the sight of Samuel's tall frame moving among the others. Each night, she prayed for rain to cover tracks, for fog to hide pursuit, for divine mercy on the son she had failed so grievously. Then, on April 10, 1862, chaos descended like the plagues of Egypt. A full Union regiment, cavalry and infantry, bluecoats vivid against green spring fields, swept through the county. Bugles blared in the distance, smoke rose from burning supply barns, shouts and sporadic gunfire echoed like thunder. Hartwell Plantation escaped direct assault, but the shockwaves hit hard. Enslaved workers dropped tools and vanished into woods, overseers fired warning shots into air thick with panic. William roared orders from the veranda, face purple with rage, organizing armed patrols to guard the roads. In the maelstrom, Samuel slipped away. Eleanor noticed almost immediately his absence, a sudden void, like a missing heartbeat. Relief surged first. He's gone. He's running. Then terror followed, cold as river water, if they catch him. She waited until dusk. When the house settled into uneasy quiet, William slumped in his study with brandy, overseers counting losses. Only then did she approach her husband, voice carefully modulated with concern. "William, have you seen Samuel today? He wasn't at luncheon service, nor supper." He waved a dismissive hand, exhausted. "Probably cowering in the quarters with the rest. Scared witless by Yankee noise. He'll slink back when hunger bites." But morning revealed empty cots. Samuel was truly gone. William erupted, furniture overturned, curses echoing through halls like cannon fire. "That ungrateful whelp. After all I've invested." Search parties formed swiftly, men on horseback, dogs baying with bloodlust, tracking the riverbanks and back trails. Eleanor watched from an upper window, hands clenched white on the sill, praying fog would rise, rain would wash scent away, Providence would shield him. 3 days they hunted. 3 days of nothing, no footprint, no sighting, no trace. Samuel had vanished as completely as morning mist. William's fury eventually burned to ash, deflected onto larger woes, advancing Yankees, crumbling Confederacy. One less mouth to feed, he muttered bitterly, but the loss rankled a dent in his dominion. For Eleanor, emotions warred like armies on her soul. Relief that he had escaped detection. Grief at the final severance, no farewell, no embrace. Hope that he reached Union lines, tasted freedom's air. Despair that he might lie dead in some thicket, felled by bullet or exhaustion. She would never know. That uncertainty became her final penance, a wound kept open, bleeding eternally. The war ground on, merciless. By summer 1863, Union forces controlled swaths of Mississippi. Federal troops occupied Hartwell briefly, boots thudding through halls, supplies confiscated, William arrested on suspicion of aiding rebels. He returned weeks later, diminished, health failing. Fields lay fallow, formerly enslaved workers walked away by decree, some spitting at the gate as they left. The great house decayed, paint peeling like old skin, roof leaking in silver streams during rain. Tragedy compounded in 1873. Yellow fever swept the region like God's scythe. Catherine and Margaret, her daughters, now young women with lives barely begun, fell ill within days of each other. Fever burned them from within, delirium brought visions of angels or demons. Eleanor nursed them tirelessly, bathing fevered brows, whispering prayers, but death claimed them both. She buried them in the family plot beneath moss-draped oaks, small headstones gleaming white against earth still raw. Numbness enveloped her, no tears left, only hollow echoing where love had been. William followed in 1868, felled by stroke at his desk, pen dropping mid-ledger as if even accounts abandoned him. Eleanor, 51, inherited ruin, a decaying mansion, untended land, debts mounting like storm clouds. Alone amid ghosts, daughter's laughter echoing in empty rooms, Samuel's footsteps forever absent. She wandered halls like a specter, fingers tracing dust on portraits, memories rising unbidden, Thomas's smile, Samuel's gray eyes on Christmas Eve, the weight of his tiny body that one stolen minute. She wrote letters obsessively to Freedmen's Bureau offices, Union veteran societies, churches in northern cities, describing a young man with a crescent scar, literate, intelligent, last seen fleeing Mississippi in 1862. Never signing as his mother, who would believe? Responses were nil, or polite regrets. Samuel remained a phantom. By winter 1879, consumption or simply accumulated sorrow claimed her. At 52, she felt ancient, bones aching, cough rattling like chains in her chest. Knowing the end neared, she took up pen one final time. In the dim library, by flickering lamplight, she wrote her confession, pages of careful script, ink blurring where tears fell. She recounted everything: forbidden love with Thomas, exile and birth, the cruel lie of death, Christmas revelation, painful conversations, the night she urged escape. She poured out guilt like lie, scouring her soul. I do not know if my son lived to taste freedom. I hope he found a life rich with love, children who never knew chains, peace that eluded me. I hope he hated me, for hatred would mean survival. I deserve no forgiveness. I was his mother yet stood silent while he served my table. Fear of scandal, loss of station, society's scorn, these I valued above his liberty. Inaction was my greatest sin, cowardice my eternal damnation. May God judge me harshly, as I judge myself. She sealed it with the original bill of sale, crimson paper faded to rust, tucked both into a tin box among old deeds. Eleanor Hartwell died February 3, 1879, alone save for a hired nurse who closed her eyes. Buried beside husband and daughters, the plantation abandoned to vines and weather. The house stood sentinel over secrets for over a century, roof collapsing, walls surrendering to mold, oaks reclaiming verandas. Locals whispered of hauntings, a woman's sob on wind, gray-eyed shadow at windows. In 1983, historian Dr. Rebecca Chen, researching enslaved families in Adams County, followed rumors to the ruin. Amid rotten raccoon nests, in the former library, she unearthed the tin box. Reading Eleanor's confession by flashlight, astonishment grew to reverence, then sorrow. Verification took months: marriage records, birth announcements for Catherine and Margaret, William's death notice, the 1861 bill of sale for Samuel, age approximate 14, crescent scar left wrist. Union reports confirmed April 1862 raids freeing dozens in the vicinity. But Samuel? No trace. No enlistment papers, no post-war census match, no pension file. He had stepped into history's vast anonymity and disappeared, perhaps thriving under new name in Chicago or Canada, perhaps buried unmarked beside a trail. His silence echoed louder than any record. Dr. Chin published in 1985, excerpts anonymized initially, then fully as ethical debates resolved. The article rippled through academia, sparking searches that yielded nothing. Samuel remained enigma, a symbol of countless erased lives. Eleanor's story is not singular. Thousands of mixed children born into slavery, some from assault, some from forbidden love, were sold away, parentage denied, identities obliterated. Mothers, white and black, wept in silence. The system devoured families deliberately, valuing cotton over kinship. Yet Eleanor's confession pierces uniquely, a white woman's voice acknowledging complicity. Victim of patriarchal cruelty, yes, powerless at 17, widowed into ruin. But also beneficiary, mistress overseeing whips, silent while her son bowed. Her hesitation raises thorns without easy extraction. Can love absolve an action? Does societal constraint excuse moral failure? We grapple still, because slavery's legacy pulses in inequality's veins, justice deferred, wounds unhealed. On Christmas Eve 1861, a mother unwrapped her son as property. In April 1862, she set him free at terrible cost. She died unknowing his fate, but her words endure accusation and plea. We listen now. To Eleanor's guilt. To Samuel's silence. To millions whose names were stolen. We listen, remember, and vow, never again. The house crumbles still, a monument to what was. Wine through broken windows sounds almost like a woman's sigh, or a young man's footsteps fading into forest. Perhaps only imagination. Perhaps not. Their story, fractured, unresolved, remains our inheritance. A call to courage where Eleanor faltered. To justice where systems failed. To humanity where it was most denied. We carry it forward.